Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Lion Knights. This time we continue our reading of Brequelle. Gus and Doug are accompanying 3 of their friends to see a very important fae about joining a troop. Folklore tells us that faes often go about in troops, and if you get swept up into a troop, you become a fae too. That's what happened to Gus and Doug. They escaped, but now their friends want back in. So they're headed into the woods with these friends and some more to meet with this person who deals in trooping fays. The beast men followed her out of the cheese buoy and through the streets of the town. It all looks so normal, Gus marveled. A little old-fashioned and no cars, but other than that, Doug nodded. Normal like we haven't seen in years. He turned to the threesome. Good enough for you? They grinned and nodded, but did not speak. They seemed shy, all shy together, as if rehearsing the joining of emotions they meant to undergo, or achieve. He stared at them, remembering and baffled, then turned his attention to the conversation between Gus and Petra. So, Miss Petra, you can tell me to shut up and mind my own business, but I'm curious. Why do you want this? No, you have a right to ask, for reasons I will explain. It is very simple. I was afraid of death. But you Grand Normans, you see ghosts all the time. You know death's not the end. Oui, but we do not know what the end is. Oh, most of us are Avenese or some other kind of Catholic, and the rest are Protestants or Jews for the great part, and so they believe in a judgment of mercy and justice and in heaven, but we cannot say we know. Ghosts move on. No one comes back to report, or so seldom, so fleetingly, it amounts to rumors. Also, she faltered. Her shadow and the sounds of her steps on the pounded earth of the road both faded. Gus watched to see if she became more transparent. He could not tell, but it seemed her colors paled. Certainly her expression was grave. These are general issues of faith, but perhaps I had little faith that I would face mercy further into death. I don't want to know, Gus began. There was nothing terrible, but could I lay claim to any splendid virtue? No. She looked at Gus's troubled expression. You wish to say, I think, that one does not earn one's admission in this way, that one depends on the generosity of le bon Dieu. But that perhaps is where my faith fails. She sighed, straightened, and strode more boldly. Her step grew louder, her shadow darker. So, in my life, I had done business with the Fanatur. I knew that he indeed had mastered shape, as his use name says, and now he seeks to become a Fey Lord. That is, a Fey who can bind and loose others in troops, lead troops, set them to mighty deeds with their combined power. But you know such things at least as well as I. By now she walked in a cluster of Lungmao. They all nodded, the threesome in synchrony. The centaurs trailed behind, listening intently. So I know he is building a troop. I go to him, an old woman, my heart failing, little time left, and I ask him to take me into his troop. No senior lord would have taken me. They have all the troopers they want or can rally at need, and they want members with special abilities, special powers, not like me. But he is a beginner. He needs head count and practice. He takes me. He even takes me on my condition, which is that I do not stay long. I join, I am now a Fey, I leave. While I am there, his Kohei, his rabble pick up knowledge, and he hopes they will pick up my skills as well. And in return for the brief stay, I agree to owe him a favor, un grand faveur. Rabble? Asked Doug. He is a beginner, as I said. The souls he can acquire are not Fays already, are not even good ghosts. They are leftovers. Neither heaven nor hell wants them, nor greater fey lords. She smiled at the threesome. You are a treasure to him. Gems who may choose their own setting, you shall see. And in bringing him such a treasure, I have done him his great favor, and that is because Monsieur Carlin introduced you. She cast a brilliant smile back at Carlin, who smiled in return. And because of this, I am free of obligation. Everybody wins, Doug said somberly. The group walked on in silence. They were in a residential neighborhood now, stone cottages with thatch roofs, yards full of flowers and vegetables but without lawns. People's clothes and some bicycles were the only modern touches. People stared, of course, but not a great deal, especially not the adults. It wasn't cool for an adult Grand Norman to be amazed at what was, after all, just some new shape of fey. But the young children held no such poses and stared openly at the collection of odd people. Gus smiled when one little girl met his eyes, accidentally showing teeth, but she just smiled back. Soon they were on a dirt path leading out of town through a belt of pasture land into La Forêt de Brequelle. Breaking a long silence, Petra said to Doug, I see that you regret the decision your three friends have made, but consider this. Would such a condition appear so repellent to you if it had been offered freely, without slavery and the enforced transformation? How would you have answered if a lady of the Fays had come to you openly and proposed, Be my liege men, and I will give you immortality, psychic unity, and the chance to learn transformation and other magic? What would have been your answer? Doug shook his head in bafflement. You? She asked of Gus. He shook his head, too. I don't know. I'm too different now from the guy I was before. And I don't just mean this. He swept his hand from face to boots. Being in the hive mind, the troop, didn't mean we all thought the same, but we all thought about the same things a lot, and we all thought about death. I know none of us wanted to die. Being in the troop told me that much, but death seemed like the only escape. And we did escape, only now we found that death is the one way we can't do it. For me, maybe not for anyone else, it feels like being trapped again. Transcendence, said Doug to Gus. You developed a taste for transcendence, an unfortunate one. I don't know. I'm not sure that's what I mean. I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, Gus went on to Petra, by roping his three friends into the exchange... Anyway, Gus went on to Petra, but roping his three friends into the exchange with his glance, you guys going back into a troop just feels like going back into the old trap. It won't be, Philippe assured him. We won't let it. We won't put up with the trapping any more than you will. If it's going to be that, we'll call it off and do something else. There will be no trap, no enslavement, Petra assured them. I had conveyed your concerns to the Vanator, and he is tout au fait d'accord, entirely agreeable. You will see. And you don't care about going home? Doug asked. Not as much as about this, Philippe answered. Maybe we can do both, but this first. The path entered the wood now, piercing a stone wall, head high at this point. The wall was dry laid of unshaped stones, except that at the entrance, which was flanked by smooth square-cut pillars, there were trefoils of leaves. As they entered, Carlin remarked, Last time we were here, Buckjack and me, it was night. Mademoiselle Petra guided us by her own light. This time the woods were drenched in late summer noontide. What was he like to look at, this Vanator? Doug asked. Like an invisible man wearing a mask and a black and white cowboy outfit, Carlin answered. That time. Remember, said his friend, Buckjack Weldon, that Vanator means shape-master. We'll just have to see. The trail wound through oak, ash, and hawthorn to a clearing deep in the forest. There stood a square of 4 upright stones, and in the center lounged the Vanator. He wore a form that was lion-like, but no lion. The general shape was leonine and maned in gold, but the body was scaled in fine silver, like fish mail, except for the tuft of the tail and the feathering on the lower legs. The ears were long and pointed, and the eyes were silver. "C'est un hommage, une idéalisation," Petra murmured. Philippe, Ted, and John nodded. Doug and Gus guessed her meaning well enough. The Longuemaux were being complimented and welcomed. The Thanator was not alone. Behind him lay a second lion, bigger but ordinary in color and detail. Off to one side stood a tight cluster of figures, and a looser crowd was scattered through the clearing. Most looked human, though many were very short. Small animals with very expressive faces peered up through the grass or crouched on friends' shoulders. Bundles of sticks pushed to the front for a better view. There seemed to be a lot of butterflies and dragonflies. The gold and silver lion rose and said, "Well met, gentlemen." The voice was a light tenor, calm and even. "Your friends described you well." It came prowling toward them. "And welcome back, cavalrymen," it said to the centaurs. "Return and we return." "Keep faith and so do we," Carlin and Weldon answered. "Indeed. I with you, you with Petra, and now Petra with me. And back around the circle, of course. Excellent." He sat then, gestured in a very human-like way with one forepaw. "Please be comfortable, everyone." They all sank down onto the grass. "Now, you three gentlemen wish to be together in a troop, and I wish to employ you. How shall we arrange this?" Doug raised his hand. "Sir, may I ask a question?" "Certainly, but first answer this one. Who are you? You are not one of my three prospective aides." "My name is Douglas Chung, sir. This is my friend Gus Weisskopf. We were their captains when we were all lost on the road together. And we want to see them off right, sir," Gus supplied. The Thanator nodded. "Ask." "Does a troop have to have a boss, a master?" Doug asked. "When we were slaves, the Dagoradel could command us, and if we resisted even in thought, this panic and dread set in. If we went on fighting, it started to feel like we were dying. Eventually, we just... That slavery is the main thing I want to protect them from, sir." The lion sighed noisily. "This is what comes of taking unwilling folk." He gave a sardonic glance over his shoulder at the tight group of fays behind him. "I know. They are such a troop. I hold them in so tight a grip they do not even think about freedom." The troop stared back at him, expectant and blank. "No," he told Doug, "a troop does not need a master to stand. A master must create it, but need not stay in it. I doubt your war lady stayed in yours but by the thinnest chain. The tight chain she set in the beginning would do the rest. I offer you a troop of a different sort. I am a beginner. They were my first effort, simple and crude." He nodded at the little mob. "In order to enlist you, I will try the opposite tack, a light touch, taken freely, with your help in managing it. Understand that, being a beginner, I must experiment, but I will strive to tailor your bond to your liking. Excellent practice. And," his silver eyes gleamed, and the lion's face registered far more eagerness than cats normally do, "I will seek to make of you a team of champions, perfect in accord and coordination, able to pool your skills and powers. Powers I do not grant you, but teach you. Powers you will learn all the faster for having three minds together in harness." He lifted his hand, for suddenly, smoothly, he was anthropomorphic enough to have a hand, and cast a little mist into the air. In the mist, the audience could see three figures in silhouette, clearly Longuemaux, tall, heavy, and tailed, running over rough ground. They cast themselves down and were lions. They ran up to a tree, became men, fully men, and climbed. At the top they leapt off and were eagles, flying away. He lowered his hand, and the mist faded. "If you wish it. For the polish and zest and fire of it all is that your joint will, your threefold freedom does this. I do not want puppets, reflections." He tossed his head dismissively at his troop, who stared back glassily. "I want aides, companions, whom I can join in deed or revel, and leave knowing I will be welcomed back. I want to lead folk who will take me as leader, not submit to me as leader. I have that already." He nodded again at the troop, but then also at the general crowd of onlookers. "And it is something, but I want more. I want a court, sidekicks, a merry band. Gentlemen, you want to be such a band. Shall we dance?" Doug realized his mouth was hanging open. He glanced at Gus in time to see his friend's jaw close. Gus glanced back, eyes shining. That could be them. It would be the threesome if... Gus blinked, inhaled, and asked, "What do you want from them in return? You call them your aides, so you want some sort of service." Doug made a mental effort and pulled away from the fascination that had come boiling up in him. "What does a Fey Lord do?" he asked. The Thanator nodded, commending the questions as reasonable, and settled into a more normal, library lion-like position. "Fays have little government. A Fey Lord or Lady is simply the Fey no other local Fays would wish to cross. Being able to bind and loose troops is certain proof of sufficient power. But if you wish a long reign and a happy, you do more. You are a rescuer, a defender. You settle disputes." Gus laughed. "You're a cop, a sheriff." The Thanator laughed back. "And I would have deputies, 3. The lion smiled invitingly. "Or 5? Freedom, exhilaration, endless potential. We want to go home." Gus said it, but Doug realized he had said it in chorus. Gus was holding his upper arm. He felt Gus had pulled him back from a precipice. "Thank you, but we want to go home," repeated the man who hungered for transcendence, who thirsted for heaven. But before that achievement, there was his family, and Doug's. "Thank you, no," said Doug. The lion smiled. "Another time, perhaps." Had Doug nodded in answer? He wasn't sure. The others were talking details. It turned out Buckjack was the son of a trader and was applying the family skills to negotiating. The Thanator would not control the threesome through the troop, but they would swear an ordinary oath of service to him. Buckjack knew the terms. Meanwhile, Doug half listened and wholly stared at his own hand, the right one, the one that had been cut off and grown back. The fingernails were back now, and the scales were nearly as heavy as those on the back of his left hand. There had been other cases. Gus had lost his tail twice, taken as a trophy both times, he suspected. Marco had lost a hand. All had grown back over the course of a month. Those regenerations, Captain Fletcher had said, were early clues that they were now immortal and shapeshifters. He remembered how odd it had felt when that hand wasn't there, despite feeling that it ought to be. He had heard that phantom limbs usually faded after a while, but the real hand had grown back too quickly for that. His body image had never changed. Not from that. He remembered waking up to Gus's panicky shouting, seeing Gus monsterized, soon enough realizing he was too. And his body image was already changed, already included a tail and mobile ears. He understood the centaurs when they told him they could not remember what toes were like, or how it felt to be two-legged and tailless. That hand had come back from nothing. It could go on to become a paw, a wing, a flipper. He glanced at Carlin and Buckjack, respectfully dickering with the Thanator, and reflected his arm could divide, branch off a foreleg. Theoretically, he could become a centaur once he learned the trick. Weeks ago, Fletcher had told them they could learn shapeshifting, but Doug had only thought of changing back, fixating on the lost human form. The Thanator's sales pitch made it clear there was so much more. He thought back on the talking dogs that had taught him Sindarin, the little gossiping nimmies back in Husband. He looked around at the watching birds and beasts and insects. He could be any of those. It was splendid. It was scary. How deep would the changes go? He remembered Gus's hand on his arm, holding him back, holding him steady. Gus had let go by now, his hand back on his own knee. Gus reached out and gave his forearm a quick, grateful squeeze. Gus looked up and flickered a smile. "I'm okay now," he muttered softly, so that Doug realized the grab had been because Gus, too, had been rocked by the idea of endless forms. Soon enough it was done. The Thanator stood. "We are agreed, gentlemen. Let us go for a run. Try to keep up with me, but even more try to keep together. When we stop, you will be in your troop. And tired. As will I be. It is no small thing we do here. After that, you will take your oath as a troop." The threesome rose and looked around at the clearing, at the forest of Brequelle, where they would start living as fays among fays. Now. Doug could see they were tense and bright-eyed, but they did not immediately turn to the gleaming lion. They turned to him and Gus. John thrust his hand out to clasp, then closed in for a hug. Philippe did the same with Gus, then Ted. Then they traded around until all three had embraced both of them. "You got us through," John declared. "You got us here. Thank you." "Let's do a team-up someday," said Philippe. "The three and the two." "We'd have been so much more lost without you guys," Ted declared. As soon as the hugging was done, Gus shoved them gently off. "Go, go," he told them. "Be happy," said Doug. "Be whole." He turned away and did not watch them run off with the lion. He himself felt by no means whole. One part was regretting that he had refused the invitation to exaltation and belonging and enlargement of being. The other part was horrified that he was so tempted away from family and home and humanness. He strode briskly back the way they had come, eyes on the ground, ignoring the various strange fays, the other strange fays, scattered around the clearing. He heard Gus's footfalls catching up and breathed a little easier. "I hadn't thought about all the things," Gus said, trailing off. "Me either," said Doug, finally raising his eyes from the trail before him. "That was... to think we could..." He was no better at pushing it out than Gus was. Gus nodded and walked silently next to Doug out of the clearing and through several twists of the trail. Then, "Would you like to be lions someday? I mean, we really could, couldn't we? How weird is that?" "Pretty weird. Yeah, lions would be cool. Lion nights." Hoofbeats came up behind. "You guys okay?" came Carlin's voice. Doug meant to answer, but continued brooding about lions instead. Would it be easier to go on to lion than back to man? Gus replied, "There's been a lot of goodbyes lately. And this one, the other guys are going off to something like normal living, even Rob, even the ones back in Netsock ISIS. But those three, will they be themselves anymore?" Will we be ourselves? Doug wondered. The option of transformation will always be there. Always, as in forever. "And I gotta wonder if we'll be ourselves," Gus went on. "We gotta learn shape-shifting to become human again. Hell, I guess it's inevitable we learn shape-shifting eventually. And I gotta say, it looks so tempting. Lion, eagle, dolphin, fire, wind, just so much fun. But does that mean we're bound to drift away into drift away? Can we stay ourselves?" "Why not?" asked Buckjack. "I'm still me, and I've been turned into a horse. Horse feelings, horse perceptions mixed in with the human, but I'm still John Joseph Nicholas Weldon. You might guess that we've talked about this identity stuff among ourselves a lot." "A lot," echoed Carlin. "What didn't we talk about all through those long nights, when we didn't sleep, 'cause horses don't sleep much, and now we're horses. But we're still men, and still us. And we got Charlie Horse with us, and you can bet he didn't let this one alone. He wanted... well, maybe I shouldn't tell tales out of school. No, contradicted Buckjack, it's fair. Charlie wanted to change himself, his personality. And he did. We know, because he explained it to us, because the new personality is candid and open. That's why it's fair to talk about him this way. And he used the new stallion in himself to get that way, to be bold enough to open up. But it was all his own doing. We watched him do it. It was him doing it. People can change, but shapeshift won't make him change, not into other people. There's the trooping business, muttered Gus. Okay, I don't know what it's like to be in a troop, Buckjack admitted, but you were in a troop with them yourself for 3 years, a pretty tight one, I hear, and you were still individuals, right? Well, yeah, there was a lot of stuff swapping around between heads, but yeah. Well, anyway, you all bounced back to being individuals when you left, and they're in on a purely voluntary basis. Petra's footfalls had made no sound, but she had kept up with them as easily as breeze. Mes chers garçons, you do not know what you are going on about. She strode ahead of them, then turned to face them, bringing them to a halt on the forest path. It is, I may say, very American, or maybe very male, or very young, to focus on endless change. Fays do not do that. Habit is great. Or maybe it is just the nature of choice. Every decision, every day chosen to live a certain way, makes you more definite. You may flit from shape to shape like a cloud, but the character that directs the changes becomes every day more distinct. The Fays you have met, the other Fays you have met, who are so much older than you, they have been what they are for centuries, millennia, I have no doubt. The Thanator is newly a lord, but that urge to grow and lead, that is immemorial in him. I came into existence more than 100 years ago, and you, mes enfants, are a small fraction of that, but we are all so young as Fays. So it behooves us now to select our virtues, so that in future centuries, when we have crystallized into our characters, we are something admirable, or at least bearable. I said back in the town I had no splendid virtue to offer God, but now I have stripped myself of every excuse. I have all the time in the world. I need nothing to preserve my life, and I will always see the consequences of my acts. So I am determined to be a good fairy, so that I do not make a hell of everlasting time. Do you the same. You will drift away only if you set your minds to drifting. Your problem is not that you will shift and smear and smudge into nothing in particular, but that you are certainly going to crystallize into something very specific, and all your work is to make sure it is something good. The two Longmao stared at her. Then Doug recited softly, This Jack, Joke, poor Potsherd, Patch, Matchwood, immortal diamond, is immortal diamond. Petra looked her puzzlement at him. Poem, he explained. Gerald Manley Hopkins. About dying, Gus amplified. I was there when he hauled it out of the troop memory. We talked a lot about dying, after all. In a flash, at a trumpet crash, I am all at once what Christ is, since he was what I am, and this Jack, Joke, is immortal diamond. His voice fell to a whisper on the last words. Petra nodded. For our mortal friends, the flash and the crash, but diamonds also form under ages of pressure. That is my path and yours, chosen or not. Do not concern yourself that you are tempted by shape-shifting. Yes, one can get drunk on it, but shape-shifting by itself is not bad or good for you. And if there is something you should do first, go see your families, whatever, then go do it. The two stared at her silently for a few seconds, then bowed. Thank you, mademoiselle, said Doug. And you guys, said Gus to the centaurs. Everyone resumed the walk out of the forest. One heard leaf song and birds, ordinary ones. So, lions, said Doug to Gus. Yeah, after we learn to turn back, of course. I figure we have all the bits, he swished his tail. We just changed the proportions and the upholstery. Doug nodded. Foxes. I want to do foxes, too. Sure. So they're going to go home, and we will watch them go home next time.